Well, the first thing, Jane, was just to start with you. How does your job kind of work in practice? I'm kind of interested in the nuts and bolts.
The university has 4 cross-cutting strategies, one around education for life, one for discovery for research and impact, and global and engagement and place wrap around those strategies. So as PVC for engagement and place, my job really is to make sure that we deliver on that engagement and place strategy across the institution, but critically that really makes the connections and is embedded in our education and research delivery. We've established a central engagement and place team, and that brings together a number of colleagues from different groups. So that gives us a kind of core resource within the university. But then what we've done is looked at establishing cross-cutting deans. So we've got 7 different cross-cutting deans who are people who have particular areas of expertise in different sectors. So that might be about culture, it might be about business, it includes things like EDI, social justice, sport, and so on. And what this enables us to do across the university, and these are our colleagues who are embedded in different parts of the university, but they have a very much outward facing role. They build the networks, they build the contacts, they bring the intelligence and understanding about what's important to those different communities and groups. And then the other thing that's been really important is having leads for engagement in place in each of the faculties. So having that representation and champions within the faculties. So together we bring together an engagement in place virtual team. And that's really important to give both a sense of capacity, but also something that is embedded across the institution.
You mentioned that you've got some core roles as well. So you've got an engagement manager, for instance. I wondered if you could just describe those sort of central roles that underpin this.
So so looking at the teams, I mean, it's really interesting when you start to look at who's involved in delivering on this agenda. There are lots and lots of different people, and we're currently going through the watermark process, which obviously you'll be familiar with. And if you look at kind of mapping that out, we sort of calculate there's about 30 people centrally who have really critical roles to engagement and place. So that might include people like some of our impact officers, our business development managers, and so on. But in terms of that central team, we have a head of engagement who really coordinates that activity, and she's supported by coordinators. We also have a partnerships head of partnerships who really links in and supports with our relationship with local authorities and combined authorities and so on. And then we have somebody who leads on the kind of communications and engagement and corporate affairs. So that's the kind of the core structure of the team. And that really helps us coordinate the activity that we're doing centrally.
How on earth do you manage to keep such a sort of dispersed, embedded group of people working together with common purpose? It must be quite a challenge.
I think it is because the nature of this activity is it cuts across so many things. It could include pretty much everything that we do as a university. I think the first thing I would say is that having that very clear strategy and direction. So this fits absolutely with the vision of the university led by the Vice-Chancellor. And we're very clear about engagement in place. We have 6 key themes within that strategy, all of which have leads from that virtual team I was describing. That team themselves come together a couple of times a year as a big group to look at planning forward, but also reflecting on what's happened over the last year. To be fair, the last 12 months have probably been slightly unusual as we've been focused on our COVID response, but that broad structure is in place. We also have a network that brings together that group, and we have an e-newsletter that goes out monthly. We do things like our Engage and Learn forum, which brings not just that immediate group, but a wider community of practice together around engagement and place. And we also have things like our academies in Newcastle, which one of which is the Policy Academy, which brings people together around a policy agenda. So what we've tried to do is create various points where people come together as that kind of team, but also to spread that more widely. So I think that's really helped to sort of build that sense of a virtual team. I think it's important to say that that group is comprised both professional services and academic colleagues, and it really sort of brings those things together. So there are people who engage from estates, from communications, from our advancement teams, and careers, just as there are people from the faculties and schools.
Great. In your presentation in June, when you sort of talked to the Civic network about the work, you talked about how you've embedded support within budgets and planning cycles and into HR policies, which is in many ways the holy grail, really, of making sure this work is really properly supported. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what that means in practice, and start perhaps with the sort of training and development side of things, because clearly this way of working requires new skills and expertise. And how do you approach sort of building capacity across the university?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important to support that. So I mentioned before that we have our Engage and Learn forum, and that's a regular forum that is brought together. We have on that group, we have over 177 people who've been involved in those in the last few months. But they're regular sessions which focus on different things for people. I think the other thing is the Policy Academy I was mentioning earlier. Now, that is something which has been developed over the last few years, and again is available to both academic and professional service colleagues. And we grade that in terms of foundation programs that are eligible. Everyone is eligible to attend, but then also we have a fellowship program, and that people apply for that, and the demand for that is quite significant. And then an alumni program as well, and we bring in external speakers and have place-based challenges that the fellows have to work through. So we think about those kind of specific programs, and we also, as I say, have a monthly newsletter we put out. I think the other thing though to say is that we think about this in terms of our wider HR policies. So information about engagement and place is a core part of our recruitment and selection processes. So, for example, I've just been involved in the recruitment of our new Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education. So working with students, so bringing in engagement and place as part of that and our civic agenda. It's also part of the induction for all new staff, so we have that included. And critically, it's part of reward and recognition. So we have a number of, we're building it into our career progression arrangements, into our approach to development and review, so our PDR processes, but also thinking about how do we recognise really good practice. So we have engagement and place awards, we have celebrating success, and we also have our Pride in Newcastle awards, which particularly focus on engagement with students. So there's loads and loads of different things that I think create opportunities to share best practice and for people to develop their understanding.
What about workload? Because that is sometimes the temptation is to just ask people to do some engagement on top of everything else. How do you manage that tricky conundrum about actually giving people adequate time to do the work?
Yeah, that's something that we've been looking at through our workload planning policy. So, and working very closely with colleagues in faculty to make sure that there are allocations available for engagement activities. I think it's also important that workload is then links back into the planning process. So for faculties and schools, what we've embedded for each of the 4 cross-cutting strategies is guidance in terms of what are the institutional priorities that will guide faculty and school planning. So that then follows through in terms of the workload planning allocations. But I mean, I think, you know, we all have to be honest that these things are always a kind of real balancing act, and particularly at the moment where colleagues have been under such huge pressure through COVID. I think sort of understanding that and really recognising the impact that that COVID has had both on us as an institution, but also our partners. And so we've been doing quite a bit of thinking about how can we sort of make the most of some of the changes that have happened in COVID, for example, going online, and enabling colleagues to use some of that online content to reinforce our external engagement activities. So I think there are things that you can do which move beyond simply looking at the workload planning allocation, but think about how can we be a bit more fleet of foot and a bit more flexible about things so that we're not constantly adding on another layer of activity. What we've tried to do is bring together sort of a significant resource to support this agenda. So I oversee the HIFE budget, which is quite substantial in Newcastle, and we've also had the welcome addition of QR SPF funding in the last couple of years, which obviously links research into policy and practice. And we have a Pro Vice Chancellor Fund for Engagement in place. So we bring those things together. And we also make available small pots of funding for engagement and place projects too. The Policy and Evidence Hub, and that's just a working title at the moment, but that really comes out of, I think, one of the core principles for me about being a civic institution and developing civic university agreements, which is about understanding our place and understanding how we can support evidence-based policy making in place. So for me, that work, and it's linked very closely with the needs-based work, the analysis work we've been doing based on the UN SDGs. So what we did was really talk to some of our partners about how do we better connect what we understand and what we know as different organisations about what's important in our place, and how do we use that to help inform the things that we should be doing in the future. So the Policy and Evidence Hub is something that we have developed collaboratively with our partners in local government, in health, with the community and voluntary sector, and also working with the North of Tyne Combined Authority. And that's been about really trying to sort of bring things together in an interdisciplinary way. So what's the relationship between health inequalities and economic activity? And I would say that evidence-based policymaking has really been accelerated, or the importance of it has been through the pandemic. So we've been working on with our regional coordination group, which is sort of looking across the Northeast at the impact of COVID and how we understand that. So we've built some prototypes working with the National Innovation Centre for Data that we have at Newcastle. And that's helped us to sort of see how something like this could be really useful to policymakers, but also how it helps to inform research that we are doing as an institution. So I think the point about saying this is not something which is a nice to have, but it is something that is adding value to the impact of what we are doing through our research. And by making that connection, actually that is where as a university we can make a real difference, and we can mobilize our research community to inform that. So yeah, for me, that Policy and Evidence Hub is part of the virtuous circle that helps us to understand our place, to inform and be informed by our research, and then to co-design solutions to some of those challenging problems, which in turn will inform the Policy and Evidence Hub.
Just turning to external kind of partnerships and governance arrangements, that's again another big challenge really, which is how to ensure accountability and to ensure, you know, principles of co-production, etc. I just wondered if you could give us a sort of snapshot of how you're managing that external accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been doing a lot of work in Newcastle and the wider region to think about how as a university and with Northumbria University, who we work with very closely, we come together. So effectively using the framework of the Civic University Agreement to take that forward. So the Newcastle Agreement for us. So we've been working with our core partners, our anchor institutions, including partners in the NHS, local and the local authority, and the two universities. And we've established some governance mechanisms around what we're calling our Growth and Prosperity Executive Group. And that is feeding up into what is called the City Futures Board. And that board is a statutory board, which is actually led by the local authority and chaired by the leader of Newcastle City Council, but also brings on board a much wider partnership of business, community and voluntary sector and other partners in the city. And I think that kind of focus around how are we contributing and being held to account, but to that board is quite important step forward for us. It'll be interesting to see how things evolve over time. But at the moment, that group comprises the chief executive of the local authority, the chief executives of the NHS bodies, and the two vice chancellors. So that senior commitment of those leaders of anchor institutions is really the point where we are engaging at a senior level. But I think it is important to say that, you know, it is part of a much wider partnership. So we have a delivery group that sits underneath that engages with lots of other different partners depending on the nature of the project. So one example of that might be our students as partners. So we work with Northumbria University, but also the college, Newcastle College Group, on how collaboratively we are working with our students. So I think that sort of model of saying we actually have quite a small executive group, but we have a number of different work streams that involve different partners on delivering each of those kind of key elements that we're focusing on.
Jane, I'm very aware of things like the Case for Culture Partnership, the Social Justice Advisory Group, etc. So is it worth just saying a few words about the fact that there are lots of other partnership arrangements that are in the mix somehow?
Yeah, I think that's really good point. I mean, I think our connection, and I particularly think the Social Justice Advisory Group is really key for us. I think the genesis of that was through our relationship with the community and voluntary sector, but it has very much expanded to be the key sort of reference point for us as a university around our core value of social justice. And that just runs through everything that we do as a university. So that's not just about engagement and place, that is at the heart of our approach. And the Social Justice Advisory Group is important because it brings together a number of representatives from our local communities, but also our academic and professional services staff together to sort of focus on what are the things that we need to be doing together. The other partnership you mentioned was the North East Cultural Partnership, and we play a leading role working with local authorities and cultural and creative practitioners, which has really come into its own during the COVID crisis, which has impacted so massively on that sector. So, and I think I was talking before about understanding the needs and what's important. all of these different routes kind of give us much more nuanced and deeper picture of both what is important to these different groups and communities, but also the difference that we can make and where we need to be focusing. And I think that's also true of our strategic partnership with Tyne and Wear Citizens, which I think gives us another way of engaging with citizens directly, which is really important. Internally, we have each of the 4 cross-cutting strategies for the university have a Senate committee. So we have the University Engagement and Place Committee that reports to both Senate and to our council. We report twice yearly on our delivery on the strategy against 3 KPIs that we are held accountable to. I think it's quite important that you have that formal internal governance, because bluntly, unless that kind of reporting and accountability is really clear, then sometimes it's hard to sort of really keep people focused on why we need to be delivering on this stuff. So so that links in both to Senate and Council. As a university, we also have a university court, and that's quite an interesting group, because in a way that sort of has a foot in both our external partnerships, because it is largely populated by our external stakeholders, but obviously is also part of the university's governance arrangements as well. So that's quite a useful body in terms of really acting as a kind of, I think, an advisory board to make sure we're staying connected to our external stakeholders more widely. I don't draw a distinction in the sense that, for me, and we tend to sort of just use the language of engagement and place, in the sense that there are many different communities that we are working with, and to my mind it is critically important that we are engaging both directly with communities and citizens and understanding what is important to them, but we are also working with what you might call the anchor institutions, those larger organisations like the local authority, like the combined authority, like businesses. And actually the thing that universities can bring to that agenda is, in a way, that opportunity to make some of those connections, to ensure that we are developing and we are playing our role around education and research and bringing those different groups together. So for me, I think I would not draw a distinction, but rather see that as a range of different stakeholders that we're engaging with.
And finally, Jane, just thinking about the lessons you've learned about how to translate kind of the lovely warm words around Civic into actual practical activity that makes a difference. Any advice and tips for others?
I do think the point about focusing and making sure that the internal culture, capability and capacity is something that isn't ignored. I think there is a huge risk in starting a conversation with communities and partners unless you can be really confident that you can deliver on it. And actually that does take time, and particularly in recent months, people have had a huge amount on their plates, and I think recognizing that is really important. But yes, for me, I think it's really important, particularly when we're talking about things like civic university agreements, that we can really feel confident that we've put the right infrastructure, the right support mechanisms in place as an institution to be able to deliver on this agenda more widely.